Captain Jake Morrison walked across the bridge of the THS Tempest and looked at the stars through the massive viewing screen. The ship was huge, stretching 2 kilometers from front to back, and it was the first Hurricane-class battleship that humans had ever built. For 3 years, thousands of workers had built this ship in secret at the hidden shipyards near Jupiter. No other species in the galaxy knew what humans had been working on. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes turned from her station and reported that all weapons were ready to fire. The ship carried guns that no one had ever seen before, weapons that could tear apart the fabric of space itself. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez called from the engine room to say that the new fusion plasma engines were running perfectly. These engines could push the massive ship faster than anything else in known space. The ship's computer system had a voice that the crew called Gale. It spoke in a calm female voice and controlled thousands of systems throughout the battleship. Gale announced that all defensive shields were working at full power. These shields used gravity itself as protection, bending space around the ship to deflect enemy attacks. On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Vex Thule sat in his command, chair aboard a Zephyrian warship. The reptilian alien had scales that shimmered green and gold under the lights of his bridge. He looked at reports about human activities with amusement. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 17 different species over the past 100 years. To him, humans were just another weak race that would soon bow before Zephyrian might. The Admiral's intelligence officers had brought him pictures of human shipyards. They showed workers building what looked like a large warship, but Vexthul laughed at the images. Human technology was primitive compared to Zephyrian weapons. Their ships were slow, and their guns were weak. The new human vessel would be destroyed easily when the time came for war. Commander Susan Blake arrived on the Tempest's bridge carrying classified files. She was the head of Terran intelligence and had spent years gathering information about alien threats. She handed Captain Morrison a datapad that contained disturbing news. The Zephyrian Empire had sent an official message to Earth's government. The aliens demanded that humans abandon all their colonies beyond the solar system within 30 days, or face complete destruction. Morrison read the message twice before setting down the pad. The Zephyrians had already attacked human diplomatic missions, killing ambassadors who had tried to negotiate peace. The reptilian aliens saw mercy as weakness and respected only strength. Previous attempts at peaceful contact had ended with human representatives being executed in public ceremonies designed to show Zephyrian superiority. The captain walked to the center of the bridge where his senior officers waited for orders. Navigation Officer Peter Collins had plotted courses to all the threatened human colonies. Communications Officer Amy Turner had established secure channels with Earth's government and military commanders. Weapons Officer Ryan Mitchell stood ready at the tactical station, his hands moving across controls that could unleash destruction on a scale never before seen. Morrison looked at each member of his crew before speaking. He told them that they carried the hopes of all humanity aboard their ship. The Tempest was not just a warship, but a symbol of human determination to survive and protect their people. 800 men and women served on the battleship, each chosen for their skills and their willingness to sacrifice everything for their species. The captain explained that traditional human tactics would not work against the Zephyrian Empire. The aliens had overwhelming numbers and had been fighting wars across the galaxy for centuries. But the Tempest was different from any ship that had ever been built. Hidden in its hull were weapons based on technology found in ancient alien ruins on Mars. Human scientists had spent decades figuring out how these mysterious devices worked. The storm cannon was the ship's primary weapon, a device that could focus energy in ways that defied known physics. When fired, it created a beam of pure destruction that could punch through any armor or shielding system. Secondary weapons included railguns that fired metal slugs at incredible speeds, and plasma torpedoes that burned hotter than the core of a star. Morrison ordered his crew to prepare for departure. The massive engines came to life with a deep humming sound that echoed through every deck of the ship. Workers in the shipyard watched as the Tempest slowly moved away from the construction platforms where it had been built. Running lights along, the hull flickered on, showing the battleship's impressive size and sleek design. The captain gave the order to engage the slipstream drive, a new type of faster-than-light travel that humans had developed. Space around the Tempest began to bend and twist as the ship prepared to jump across vast distances in seconds. The bridge crew held on to their stations as reality seemed to stretch around them. Amy Turner received final communications from Earth as the ship prepared to leave. President Charles Wright and the Terran Defense Council sent their best wishes and reminded Morrison that the survival of human civilization might depend on his mission. The weight of responsibility pressed down on everyone aboard the battleship. With a flash of light that could be seen from Mars, the THS Tempest disappeared into hyperspace. The ship raced through dimensions beyond normal space, heading toward the border regions where Zephyrian forces had begun their invasion of human territory. Behind them, Earth continued its frantic preparations for war, building more Hurricane-class ships and training crews to fight an enemy that had never known defeat. Admiral Vexthal received reports of the human ship's departure, but dismissed the news as unimportant. In his experience, primitive species always made desperate gestures before accepting their fate as slaves or corpses. He ordered his fleet to continue preparations for the final assault on human space, confident that victory would come easily. Theater, Tempest flew through the darkness between stars, carrying weapons that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Captain Morrison stood watch on the bridge, knowing that the next few days would determine whether humanity would survive, to see another century or join the long list of species that had fallen before the Zephyrian Empire. The Tempest dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system with a brilliant flash of energy. Captain Morrison immediately ordered all sensors to scan the area while keeping the ship hidden behind a small moon. What they found made everyone on the bridge feel sick with anger and fear. Lieutenant Hayes reported that over 200 Zephyrian warships surrounded the 3 human colonies in the system. The alien vessels were arranged in perfect formations around each planet. Their weapons pointed down at the cities where millions of humans lived. Massive ships called Devastators hung in orbit like metal predators, each one capable of destroying entire continents. The sensor readings showed that the aliens had been bombing the planets for days. Cities were burning, and millions of people had already died. The Zephyrians were not just conquering these worlds, they were destroying them piece by piece to send a message to other human colonies about what would happen if they resisted. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Karen Phillips picked up emergency signals from the surface of Kepler 442b. Human survivors were hiding in underground bunkers and caves, sending desperate messages asking for help. The transmissions described orbital bombardment that turned entire cities into smoking craters. Ground forces of reptilian soldiers were hunting down survivors and taking prisoners to work as slaves in alien mining operations. Admiral Vexthal commanded the Zephyrian fleet from his flagship called the Shadowbane. The enormous vessel was 3 times larger than any human warship that had ever been built. Its hull was covered in spikes and weapon ports that made it look like a giant metal beast floating in space. The admiral sat on his command throne, watching the destruction of human cities on screens around his bridge. The reptilian commander was growing bored with the easy conquest. His species thrived on difficult battles and worthy opponents, but humans had proven to be disappointingly weak. Their ships ran away from fights and their ground forces surrendered quickly when faced with superior Zephyrian technology. Vexthal planned to finish destroying the colonies within 2 more days and move on to Earth itself. Captain Morrison made the hardest decision of his career. Following orders from the Terran Defense Council, he told Amy Turner to send a message to the Zephyrian fleet. The communication was broadcast on all frequencies so every alien ship would receive it. Morrison's voice was calm but firm as he warned the invaders to withdraw from human space immediately or face the consequences. The message reached Admiral Vexthal within minutes. The reptilian commander listened to the human's words and began, laughing so hard that his bridge crew stepped back in surprise. A single human ship was threatening his entire fleet of 200 vessels. The admiral had seen human warships before and knew they were weak and poorly armed. This had to be either complete insanity or spectacular ignorance. Vexthal decided to respond personally to the amusing human threat. He activated his communication system and spoke directly to the unknown human captain. His voice was full of contempt as he explained that one primitive ship against his mighty armada was beyond foolish. He described how he would capture the human vessel and keep its crew alive for entertainment purposes. The admiral ordered 50 of his cruisers to surround and capture the newcomer. These ships were each larger than the biggest human vessel that Zephyrian forces had encountered before. Their weapons could melt through the strongest human armor, and their shields could deflect any attack that humans might attempt. As the Zephyrian ships moved into position, Weapons Officer Ryan Mitchell powered up the storm cannon, while Engineer Rodriguez prepared all systems for combat. The ship's experimental gravitational shields began to form an invisible barrier around the Tempest's hull. These shields worked differently from anything else in the galaxy, using the force of gravity itself to protect the ship. Peter Collins maneuvered the Tempest away from the moon where it had been hiding. For the first time, Zephyrian sensors got a clear look at the human battleship. The alien crews stared at their displays in confusion because the readings made no sense. The ship appeared to be much larger than any human vessel should be, and its energy output was impossible according to known physics. The first Zephyrian attack began when plasma cannons and particle beams fired at the Tempest from multiple directions. The alien commanders expected to see the human ship explode or at least suffer heavy damage. Instead, they watched in amazement as their weapons simply disappeared when they hit the invisible shield around their target. Admiral Vexthul received reports from his ship captains that their attacks had no effect on the human vessel. The reptilian admiral refused to believe what he was hearing. No ship in the galaxy could absorb that much firepower without taking damage. His tactical officers suggested that the humans might be using some kind of new technology, but Vexthul dismissed this idea as impossible. Captain Morrison watched the alien weapons fire bounce harmlessly off his ship's shields. The gravitational barrier was working exactly as the scientists had predicted, bending space around the Tempest so that enemy attacks missed their target completely. Energy beams and plasma bolts were redirected into empty space, or absorbed by the shield system itself. Dr. Phillips monitored the crew's stress levels as the ship prepared for its first real combat test. Despite being under attack by dozens of alien warships, the human casualties remained at zero. The advanced medical facilities throughout the ship were ready to handle injuries, but the protective systems were keeping everyone safe. Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. Lisa Hayes was coordinating defensive systems while Ryan Mitchell prepared to return fire. Amy Turner was recording everything for later analysis by human scientists. Every person on the bridge knew they were about to make history. The captain gave the order that would change everything in the galaxy. He told Mitchell to show the Zephyrian Empire what a real hurricane looked like in space. The weapons officer's hands moved across his controls as the storm cannon began to charge with energy that made the ship's lights flicker. Admiral Vexthul was still trying to understand how his weapons had failed when sensors detected a massive energy buildup aboard the human ship. The readings were so high that several Zephyrian computers crashed while trying to process the data. The reptilian admiral realized that he might have made a terrible mistake in underestimating his enemy. The storm cannon fired with a sound like thunder that shook every deck of the Tempest. A beam of pure energy brighter than a star shot across space toward the Zephyrian cruisers. The weapon did not just destroy the 3 alien ships it hit, it completely erased them from existence. There were no explosions or debris. The vessels simply vanished as if they had never been built. Admiral Vexthul stared at his main screen in total shock. In 300 years of commanding Zephyrian fleets, he had never seen anything like what just happened. His tactical officer reported that the human weapon had torn apart the molecular structure of the targeted ships, breaking them down to their basic atoms. The energy readings from the attack were beyond anything in Zephyrian science. Sub-Commander Kreshta frantically worked at her station, trying to understand how the human ship had generated such devastating power. The weapon seemed to manipulate the fundamental forces that held matter together. No known technology could create that level of destruction from a single shot. The humans had somehow built something that defied the laws of physics. Captain Morrison ordered Peter Collins to begin evasive maneuvers as more Zephyrian ships moved to attack positions. The massive Tempest moved through space with grace that seemed impossible for such a large vessel. The ship twisted and turned between enemy formations while its shields continued to absorb or deflect every attack the aliens could launch. Ryan Mitchell coordinated strikes from the secondary weapon systems as the storm cannon recharged for another shot. Railgun batteries along the ship's hull fired metal slugs at incredible speeds, punching through Zephyrian armor like paper. Plasma torpedoes streaked toward alien vessels, each one carrying enough explosive power to destroy a city block. The battle became a massacre as the Tempest systematically destroyed every Zephyrian ship that came within range. Human weapons technology proved to be centuries ahead of anything the aliens possessed. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds exploded under the assault from weapons they could not understand or defend against. Communications officer Amy Turner maintained contact with the human survivors on the planet's surface. People emerged from their underground shelters to watch the impossible battle taking place in their sky. A single human warship was fighting an entire alien fleet and winning. Hope began to spread among the survivors as they realized that Earth had not abandoned them. Dr. Phillips monitored casualty reports as the battle continued. Despite being outnumbered 200 to 1, the Tempest had suffered no damage and lost no crew members. The ship's advanced medical systems were ready for wounded personnel, but the gravitational shields were keeping everyone completely safe from enemy attacks. Engineer Rodriguez reported that all systems were performing better than their design specifications. The fusion plasma engines were running at 110% efficiency, while the storm cannon showed no signs of power loss, despite firing continuously. The ship had become more than just a weapon. It was proof that human science could surpass any challenge. Admiral Vexithul realized that his fleet was being destroyed by a single enemy vessel. The thought was so impossible that his mind struggled to accept what his eyes were seeing. Zephyrian technology had dominated the galaxy for centuries, but these humans had built something that made his greatest ships look like primitive toys. The reptilian admiral decided to risk everything on one final attack. He ordered every remaining ship in his fleet to converge on the human battleship and fire all weapons at the same time. Over 120 vessels surrounded the Tempest and unleashed concentrated firepower that should have vaporized any ship ever built. The massive energy discharge lit up space like a miniature sun as hundreds of weapons fired at once. Plasma beams, particle cannons, and fusion torpedoes all struck the Tempest simultaneously. The alien crews watched their targeting screens and waited to see the human ship break apart under the incredible assault. Instead, something amazing happened that no Zephyrian had ever witnessed before. The Tempest's gravitational shields absorbed every bit of energy from the alien attack and converted it into additional power for the ship's own weapons. The storm cannon began charging faster than ever, while secondary systems came online with energy levels that had never been reached during testing. Captain Morrison felt the ship shudder slightly as it absorbed the massive attack, then watched as his power readings climbed beyond maximum levels. The aliens had just given his weapons more ammunition to use against them. He ordered Mitchell to fire the storm cannon at full power with the extra energy the enemy had provided. The resulting blast created a beam of destruction that stretched across the entire battlefield. The energy wave struck Admiral Vexthul's flagship directly, but instead of vaporizing the Shadowbane, it disabled every system aboard the massive vessel. Morrison had chosen to show mercy alongside overwhelming power by leaving the enemy crew alive, but helpless. Vexthul found himself sitting in darkness as his ship's power failed completely. Emergency lights flickered on to show a bridge filled with confused and terrified Zephyrian officers. For the first time in his life, the proud admiral felt something he had never experienced before: the fear of total defeat at the hands of a supposedly inferior enemy. The remaining Zephyrian ships stopped firing and began broadcasting surrender signals. Their crews had watched the most powerful vessel in their fleet become disabled by a single shot. No one wanted to face the same fate as their admiral. Many alien captains were already planning to abandon their ships and escape in small shuttles. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge surrounded by officers who were trying to process what they had just accomplished. The Tempest had faced odds of 200 to 1 and emerged victorious without losing a single crew member. The Hurricane-class battleship had proven that human technology could defeat any threat in the galaxy. Amy Turner received messages from all over human space as news of the victory spread through communication networks. Other human colonies that had been preparing for Zephyrian attacks were celebrating in the streets. Military commanders on Earth were demanding full reports on how one ship had defeated an entire alien fleet. The Battle of Kepler 442 was over, but Captain Morrison knew it was just the beginning. Word of this victory would spread to every species in the galaxy within days. Some would see it as hope for freedom from Zephyrian oppression, while others would view humans as a new threat that needed to be eliminated before it became too powerful to stop. News of the Zephyrian defeat spread through galactic communication networks faster than any military report in history. Species that had suffered under alien oppression for generations suddenly heard whispers of hope coming from human space. The name Tempest became a symbol of liberation on worlds where speaking of rebellion had meant death for centuries. Ambassador Helen Price arrived aboard her diplomatic vessel just hours after the battle ended. She represented the Altarian Republic, a species of graceful bird-like beings who had remained neutral in galactic conflicts, while secretly hoping someone would challenge the established order. Price had come to witness firsthand the technology that had shifted the balance of power across known space. The ambassador toured the Tempest with Captain Morrison, her large eyes taking in details of human engineering that seemed impossible. The gravitational shields that had absorbed an entire fleet's worth of firepower operated on principles that Altarian scientists had only theorized about. The storm cannon represented a breakthrough in energy manipulation that could revolutionize civilization itself. On Earth, President Charles Wright called emergency sessions with the Terran High Council and Defense Secretary Laura Kim. Reports from the battle showed weapon performance that exceeded every projection made by human scientists. The Hurricane-class battleship had not only survived its first combat test, it had demonstrated capabilities that made previous military planning obsolete. Defense Secretary Kim authorized the immediate construction of 12 additional Hurricane-class vessels while military academies began developing new training programs for crews who would operate technology beyond current understanding. Shipyards throughout the solar system received priority orders for materials and workers needed to build a fleet that could protect human space. Across Zephyrian territory, panic spread through the ruling classes faster than plague through a crowded city. Emperor Zarthul received reports from the Kepler 442 system that challenged everything his species believed about their place in the galaxy. The reptilian emperor had built his empire on the assumption that Zephyrian technology was superior to any other species. The emperor convened emergency meetings with his war chiefs and top scientists. Military advisors who had spent centuries perfecting conquest strategies found themselves unable to explain how a single enemy ship had defeated their most powerful fleet. Scientists struggled to understand weapon readings that broke fundamental laws of physics as they understood them. Lieutenant Commander Hayes coordinated intelligence operations as captured Zephyrian officers provided information about their empire's structure. The aliens revealed a complex system of conquered worlds where hundreds of different species served as slaves, soldiers, and workers. Billions of sentient beings lived under Zephyrian rule, many of them dreaming of freedom they thought would never come. Dr. Phillips established medical facilities on the liberated worlds of Kepler 442 to treat human survivors and Zephyrian prisoners. The rescued colonists provided detailed information about alien military tactics, weapon capabilities, and the internal politics that held the empire together. Many survivors volunteered to serve aboard human vessels, driven by desire for revenge against their former captors. Engineer Rodriguez worked with captured Zephyrian technology and made discoveries that shocked human scientists. The alien empires. Science had stagnated centuries ago when they decided conquest was easier than innovation. Their expansion relied on overwhelming numbers and fear rather than genuine technological advancement, making them vulnerable to truly superior weapons. The galaxy's other major powers began choosing sides in what analysts predicted would reshape civilization itself. The Nexari Collective, beings made of living crystal who possessed advanced computing technology, sent secret messages expressing interest in human innovations. Their massive ship computers could process information at speeds that biological brains could not match. The Vorthan clans, who lived in the gas giant atmospheres and built some of the finest spacecraft in known space, requested formal meetings to discuss potential alliances. These whale-like beings had remained independent by avoiding conflicts, but they recognized that the age of Zephyrian dominance was ending, and new partnerships would be necessary. Captain Morrison found himself at the center of political storms as complex as any space battle. Diplomatic messages arrived daily from species he had never heard of, each one asking for protection, alliance, or simple confirmation that the reports about human capabilities were true. The burden of representing his entire species weighed heavily on his shoulders. Amy Turner processed communications from across human space as other colonies reported Zephyrian forces withdrawing or surrendering without fighting. The psychological impact of the Tempest's victory was spreading faster than any military advance. Alien commanders who had never known defeat were abandoning their positions rather than face weapons they could not understand. Intelligence reports showed uprising beginning on dozens of worlds where conquered species had lived under Zephyrian rule for generations. The news that their oppressors could be defeated had sparked rebellions that were spreading across the galaxy. Slaves were becoming soldiers, and former prisoners were forming resistance movements. Morrison received new orders from Earth that would determine the course of galactic history. The Terran High Council had decided that the Tempest should penetrate deep into Zephyrian space and liberate as many worlds as possible. The single ship that had begun as humanity's last desperate hope had become the spearhead of a revolution that could free billions of sentient beings. The captain assembled his senior staff to plan their next moves. Peter Collins had identified key systems where liberation efforts would have the greatest impact. Ryan Mitchell was analyzing captured alien weapons to improve their own combat effectiveness. Lisa Hayes was coordinating with resistance movements that were already forming on occupied worlds. Dr. Phillips prepared for the challenges of treating wounded from multiple species as the Tempest's crew expanded beyond its original human complement. Liberated prisoners and volunteers from allied races were joining the ship's complement, bringing knowledge and skills that would prove valuable in the battles ahead. As the Tempest prepared to leave the Kepler 442 system, Captain Morrison looked at the stars and realized that everything had changed. The ship that had started as Earth's secret weapon had become the hope of every oppressed being in the galaxy. The hurricane that had begun in human space was now sweeping across the stars, and nothing would ever be the same. 6 months after the first battle, the Tempest had grown from a single warship into the flagship of a liberation fleet that included vessels from dozens of species. Captain Morrison commanded not just his original crew of 800 humans, but over 2,000 beings representing the diversity of galactic civilization. The ship itself had been expanded with manufacturing facilities and weapon systems built from captured alien technology. The final confrontation approached as the Tempest entered the Drakmor Prime system, home to the Zephyrian Empire and seat of Emperor Zarthol's power. What Morrison saw through the viewing screen made even his experienced crew gasp in amazement. Over 1,000 Zephyrian vessels surrounded their homeworld in defensive formations that stretched from the inner planets to the edge of the system. Commander Peter Collins, recently promoted for his tactical brilliance during previous battles, studied sensor readings that showed the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. The enemy had learned from their defeats and positioned planet-killing weapons alongside experimental technologies developed in desperate attempts to counter human advantages. This would be a direct confrontation with no room for clever maneuvers. Emperor Zarthol sat on his throne aboard the largest ship ever built by his species, a mobile fortress called the Worldbreaker that was designed specifically to destroy the human threat. The reptilian emperor had spent months gathering every vessel, weapon, and soldier his empire could produce. Rather than face the slow collapse of Zephyrian civilization, he had decided to risk everything in one final battle. Communications officer Amy Turner intercepted transmissions from the surface of Drakmor Prime, where the Emperor addressed his entire species. Zarthol's voice carried across every communication channel as he declared that defeat would mean extinction for all Zephyrians. Rather than become slaves to inferior beings, they would activate planetary destruction devices that would turn their homeworld into a burning monument to their defiance. Dr. Phillips coordinated with medical staff from 12 different species as refugee ships from liberated worlds arrived to witness the climactic battle. Representatives of races that had suffered under Zephyrian rule for centuries came to watch their oppressors either surrender or face the same destruction they had inflicted on countless others. The gathering represented hope for billions of beings across the galaxy. The battle began with unprecedented violence as every Zephyrian weapon fired at once. The combined firepower of 1,000 ships created energy discharges that lit up space like artificial stars. The Emperor had ordered his forces to concentrate all their attacks on the Tempest, believing that destroying the flagship would break the spirit of the rebellion. The Hurricane-class battleship's shields, now enhanced with technology from allied species, absorbed the initial assault while storm cannon strikes began systematically destroying enemy formations. But the sheer volume of incoming fire slowly began overwhelming even the advanced gravitational barriers that had protected the ship through dozens of previous battles. Engineer Rodriguez implemented emergency protocols as shield strength dropped below critical levels for the first time since the ship's construction. Damage reports flooded the bridge as sections of the mighty vessel began showing signs of structural stress. The crew from multiple species worked with desperate efficiency to maintain systems under extreme pressure. Ryan Mitchell coordinated return fire from weapon systems that now included technology from every liberated world. Human railguns fired alongside Altarian energy lances and Nexari crystal projectors. The combined firepower represented the united strength of species that had chosen cooperation over conquest. But even their advanced weapons struggled against the massive enemy numbers. The turning point came when Captain Morrison made a decision that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Instead of continuing the destructive battle that was costing lives on both sides, he ordered Amy Turner to broadcast a message in every known language simultaneously. The transmission reached not just the Zephyrian fleet but every inhabited world in the galaxy. Morrison's words were simple, but carried the weight of absolute authority, backed by overwhelming force. He offered the Zephyrian Empire one final choice, between survival and extinction. They could surrender immediately and begin the process of freeing their conquered worlds, or they could watch their homeworld become another casualty of their own stubborn refusal to change. The human captain's message included detailed plans for transitioning from an empire based on conquest to a galactic community based on cooperation. Former slave worlds would be granted independence while Zephyrian colonies would be allowed to govern themselves. The reptilian species could maintain their culture and territory while abandoning the military aggression that had made them enemies of every other civilization. Emperor Zarthul listened to the humans' offer from his command throne, while explosions shook his massive flagship. The World Breaker was taking damage from weapons that his scientists still could not fully understand. Around him, his advisors reported that their forces were being systematically destroyed, despite having every advantage of numbers and position. Qatar, Reptilian Emperor, realized that his choice was between the gradual transformation of his empire or its complete annihilation. The humans had demonstrated both the power to destroy his civilization and the wisdom to offer an alternative. For the first time in centuries of conquest, a Zephyrian ruler faced an enemy that was both stronger and more merciful than his own forces. Zarthul gave the hardest order of his reign when he commanded his fleet to cease firing and begin surrender procedures. The transmission went out to every Zephyrian vessel, telling them to power down their weapons and prepare to negotiate the terms of their defeat. The age of empire built on conquest was ending, replaced by the promise of cooperation between equals. Captain Morrison watched as alien weapons stopped firing across the massive battlefield. Ships that had been trying to kill each other moments before began broadcasting peaceful intentions. The silence after months of constant warfare seemed almost deafening to crews who had grown accustomed to the sounds of battle. Amy Turner received messages from across the galaxy as news of the Zephyrian surrender spread through every communication network. Species that had hidden in fear for generations emerged to celebrate their freedom. Former slaves became citizens of new governments while conquered worlds began the process of rebuilding their civilizations. Dr. Phillips coordinated relief efforts as medical ships from the Liberation Fleet began treating wounded from both sides of the conflict. The principles that had guided human civilization, showing mercy to defeated enemies and helping them recover, became the foundation for a new galactic community based on mutual respect. The Tempest led a mixed fleet of human and allied vessels away from Drakmor Prime as reconstruction efforts began throughout former Zephyrian territory. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge watching ships from dozens of species working together to build a better future. The hurricane that had started with a single human warship had swept across the galaxy, leaving behind a transformed civilization, where strength served justice rather than oppression. The final chapter of the old galaxy had ended, and the first page of a new era was being written by beings who had chosen cooperation over conquest, hope over fear, and unity over division.